So how many of you would agree with me that the mind-body connection is real? Great. Any skeptics out there? All right, so the mind-body connection. This is what we think about, our body physically responds to. And to take you on just an example of this, I want you to think about holding a lemon. Picture a lemon sitting out in front of you, holding it up to the light, see the bright dimples on the skin, the light shining off of the lemon, see that rich yellow color. And now imagine taking a knife and cutting that lemon in half. Taking one of those halves, hold that lemon half up to your nose and smell the fresh lemon scent. Just letting that pour through. And now taking the lemon and biting into it. Sour juices flow across your tongue. How many of you had a physical response? Noticed your body physically responding? Right. So in a very real way, our mind is listening, our body is listening. We also see this through the stress response. When people are stressed, their body has a physical response. Our body prepares to fight off an attacker and run away. When we're stressed, the body goes into fight or flight mode. Now, opposite of fight or flight is rest and digest. When our body is in that mode, our body works on digestion, and it also works on the immune response and healing and repair. So when we're in the stress mode, the body is not working on healing and repair. Does that make sense? So now think about the things that cause us stress. What are they? Let's hear some.
Traffic.
Traffic, okay, what else?
Myself.
Relationships, people that we love cause us stress. Ourselves.
Our job.
Jobs, money, coworkers. Now these things aren't going to hunt us down and eat us, right? But our body responds the same way, just to a lesser degree. So this is one way that our health is very much impacted by our thoughts. The thoughts we think create, have a direct impact on our health. So an example of, now sometimes, we're aware of what we're thinking and then we can start to change our thoughts, especially if they're negative. This is, along with the law of attraction, the thoughts that we think create the feelings that we feel. So if we want to feel better, we need to think better thoughts, right? Now sometimes, the thoughts that we think are happening so fast that they're almost automatic, almost in the background of our mind. And we don't notice the thought as much, but we notice the effects. We might feel poor mood, fatigue, low energy, lack of motivation, depression, anxiety. These are all indicators of stress habits, mental thoughts running in the background of the mind. And we may not recognize that we may not be totally aware of them. And if we have these negative things running in the background of our mind, and they feel out of control, it's typically because they're stuck in the unconscious mind. So we recognize we're talking about the law of attraction, and we've had some of our presenters say that the conscious mind, we can focus, we can attract, right? But the unconscious mind is attracting also. In fact, it's attracting all the time. We might focus for a little bit at the conscious level, but the unconscious mind is always attracting. So, as we pay attention to what's going on in the background of the mind, we can begin to make changes that affect us in a very real way in our daily lives. One story, an example of the stress habits, comes from my client. We'll call her Linda. She came in because she was feeling depressed. She was between jobs and she wanted to find her next job position. And she would get ready for the day and then she would just feel unmotivated. And so she came in and she told me the problem. And I said, well, when do you notice that depression, that unmotivation, when does that show up for you? And she thought about it. She said, hadn't really thought about that. So I said, walk me through your day and tell me what's going on at different segments of your day. She said, well, I wake up and I feel pretty good. And then I go and have breakfast. At breakfast, I feel pretty good. I think about what I want to accomplish. It seems like when I put my clothes on and get ready to walk out the door, that I just have this weight fall on me. So I said, what happens right before that? And she thought about it, and she was like, well, I put my makeup on in the mirror. Oh, the lights went on. When she put her makeup on in the mirror, she would start to pick herself apart. She would think about all of the things she didn't like about herself. How demotivating is that? Once she had picked herself apart and put on her clothes, trying to get herself out the door and be confident was just too much to do, right? How many of us, you don't have to raise your hands for this, but how many of us have picked up a mental habit of self-criticism? Yeah, how would it be to change that? So I'm going to take you on the awareness of how to change this part. So let's call it the part of you in charge of self-criticism. Typically, it picks up self-criticism for a reason, and that reason is the thinking, if I can find all the flaws, all the things that are wrong with me, then I can do something about them. However, it's very demotivating. So think about a 6-year-old child. If you were to tell a 6-year-old child everything that's wrong with them, what do? They withdraw, they hold back, they don't want to do anymore, right? It's very demotivating. But instead, if you were to use encouragement and support, what does that do for you? Yeah, they shine, they light up. They want to show you more, they want to do more, try harder. Well, it's the same with ourselves. It's our inner 6-year-old is always listening. And if we're criticizing ourselves, we're responding the same way. We're going into lack of motivation. I just don't want to, I don't feel as happy and positive. And I can't take those steps. So, now that your mind knows a better strategy of using encouragement and support, notice what difference would that make in your life? Rather than pointing out your flaws, what if it pointed out the things that you were doing well so that you could do more of what you're doing well? In the world of coaching and psychology, we call that appreciative inquiry. Rather than focusing on the problem, let's focus on the solution. Let's focus on what we do well. If we talk about the problem, what happens? The problem gets bigger. If we focus on it, we think about it, and when we think about the problem, we go into the problem state. But if we think about the solution, focus on the solution, we go into the solution state, and we find the solutions. So, working with Linda, we went ahead and changed the critical voice. It switched from criticism to encouragement and support. Next week she came back, 20 years of depression has cleared just by changing this mental habit. So now let's go ahead and do that for you. So notice, it's just a strategy. Criticism really wants to be better, to improve your life, right? But notice how demotivating it is. It's actually getting in the way of the very thing that it's trying to create for you. So rather than criticism, what if it were to use encouragement and support? So I want you to go internal now, just for a moment. And recognizing that part of you, think about that part of you that may have been critical, may have been pointing out what's wrong with you. And now that that part of you notices the different strategy, using criticism versus using encouragement and support, just ask that part, is it willing to shift its focus from criticism to encouragement and support? And just give me a nod of your head when you get a yes. So just this process will change for a lot of people. Let's see at hands. How many people got a yes and felt kind of an inner shift? Great, great. Now if it hasn't shifted, typically it's running an old program, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just by identifying the old strategy and the new strategy, it can be as simple as asking that part of ourselves to make a shift, to move from one old strategy and to adopt a new one. So sometimes, so this is a good example of changing a habit and changing stress habits. If you're experiencing that criticism in the back of your mind, then it also creates that feeling of lack of motivation, depression. For every client that comes in, I have them do an intake form, and for everyone that has marked self-criticism, they've also marked depression. So as you begin to start changing your thought habits, noticing those habits that are running through your mind, and typically we notice first the feeling. So you might look for those times when you're not feeling as happy or excited. Notice what was the thought right behind it. So there's another way that these mental blocks get stuck in the mind. And that is they get stuck in the unconscious mind. So consciously, we may not be totally aware of them, but if they're stuck in the unconscious, it's part of that law of attraction system that they're attracting from that negative place. Even if you're keeping your conscious awareness high, if we don't clear up these underlying unconscious blocks, we're not going to be getting the results. We're going to be getting interference. So the next story that I have is about a client, and this really illustrates this interference and how it shows up at a physical level in the body. So he came to me, his name is Paul, he's in Vancouver, Washington. He was 70 years old, and he came to me wanting to change his eating habits. He wanted to have more energy, he wanted to be healthier, and he wanted to get off of medication. Blood pressure medication and some of those medications. So we went ahead and changed the cravings and the habits. His eating habits were right on track. And then I said, well, we still have some time. What else would you like to change? And he said, well, I had a heart attack about a year ago. And I went to my cardiologist, and I had an EEG, electroencephalograph. And it showed tissue death on the back of my heart. He said, I'm really scared about having a recurrence of this heart attack. And is there anything that we can do to strengthen the heart? So I said, well, let's see. So we went through a hypnosis process, and it's just as simple as going internally. And I had him bring his awareness down into his heart, the place that had experienced the damage. And I asked him, what is this all about? What do you notice in this area of the damage? And he said, I feel sadness. And I said, go to the sadness. If the sadness were saying something, what would it be saying? And he said, oh, it's sadness at the intolerance in the world. He was a gay gentleman, and he had witnessed a lot of his friends losing jobs or being discriminated, having a difficulty with family because they were gay. So I knew that this really required a higher level answer. So I had him drift up to his higher self, just drifting up in his mind, and I said, from that place of your higher self, your soul perspective, what do you notice about this old idea? He said, the evolution of humanity is longer than just my lifetime. And I had him create an image to carry back with him. He chose the sunshine, and we brought that down into his heart and let that radiate through the old sadness, just filling that up with that higher awareness. Shifting that mental block, shifting that belief, shifting that focus. And then I had him imagine going into his heart as if he could rebuild the area of that tissue. Using the law of attraction, he imagined healing his heart and being totally well. 6 months later, he came back, said, I have an EEG from my cardiologist, and he was amazed. He said, your tissue damage is completely gone. You now have a totally healthy heart. This is not supposed to happen in Western medical model. Our heart is not supposed to be able to heal itself. But when we apply the law of attraction, higher thinking, higher focus, who knows what's possible? And we're hearing these stories from people all over as well. There's an online forum of hypnotherapists and NLP practitioners sharing their stories. And the first part of it is the possibility. We have to be open to the possibility of something new. I know everyone has a different healing journey. I would say everyone has a different set of pieces that they need to address. But who knows what's possible when you start to open up that awareness? And just like one of our speakers said, when you contact the inner knower, when you recognize that inner voice within that says, yes, it's possible for you. So, in 2006, I was diagnosed with lupus. And I didn't know what lupus was. I was sitting across from the doctor, and I had actually studied herbal medicine. And so hearing this, I knew I had had a lot of stories of miraculous healing. So I had the belief that it could be changed, that it could be different. And she told me all of the effects of lupus, the symptoms: rash across the face, the immune system attacks the body's soft tissues and organs, an allergy to the sun, so if you go into the sun you'll have hives and it might even trigger a response. It was unreal. I had been a backpacker wilderness guide, and I heard the doctor telling me all the things that I could no longer do. But I also had the inner sense that it could be different. I started to notice myself imagining my future without hiking, without sunshine. And I decided I didn't want to do that. So I started to imagine the opposite, what was possible. I started seeing myself on the sun in Mexico. Started imagining myself hiking. I just carried with me that idea, yes, I think it can be different. So I think I'm a slow study, it took me a while. But through the law of attraction, through carrying that belief, I met the people that helped me put the pieces together and figured out what was going on with my own system that was creating such that illness within my own system. And what we found were moving parts. It's like putting together pieces of the puzzle. As I mentioned, everyone's healing journey is different. A lot of clients come in for the same reason, maybe it's weight loss or stop smoking, but the underlying reasons, the underlying patterns can be very different. And unless we address those underlying patterns, that interference, then we're not going to get the results that we're looking for. So through the process of my own experience and also working with clients, we identified 7 levels of healing, 7 levels at which we can create a change. Actually, this comes from my NLP trainers, and it's the Gregory Bateson's model, but we can apply it to health and wellness as well. What it did is it created a format that just made a lot of sense into what can change and shift so we can get to that place where we're thinking better, feeling better, and experiencing life in better ways. So the first level is we can make a change in the environment. And environment, in this case, in health issues, relates to what we eat, the air we breathe, the water that we drink. It's kind of the environment we're creating for the body at a physical level. As I had gone through herbal studies school, I started researching online and found that there were many people who had actually shifted their chronic illness through changing diet. There were some big, the big ones to change were wheat and dairy. So I did play around with that, and about 50% of my symptoms went away. The symptoms are achiness, much like arthritis. Can't move, difficulty, fatigue. You can't exercise more than 20 minutes without being totally exhausted. So once I changed just my diet, things started to shift a little. Then the next level is the behaviors. Now behaviors relate to like the stress habits that I mentioned before. Some of the ones I found in my own self were like the need to be perfect. You can imagine how stressful that one is. Anybody else have that one? Okay. So once that one changed, it took off a lot of stress. And then capabilities. Capabilities is about learning new skills. Well, if we look at the body and illness rather than disease, if we look at it instead as a behavior and a capability, then we might be able to help it do something different. So for example, instead of I have lupus, I have a disease, we say it's a behavior. The body is doing a behavior. My body is lupusing. Notice that phrase? Does it shift how you think about it? Rather than it's me and I can't do anything about it, it's like, no, it's just doing this thing. I didn't always have lupus. It didn't show up until I was like 32. So my body knew how to not do it, but somewhere it picked up how to do it too. Well, if it's a behavior, can it learn a new behavior? So going off of that model, then I began to look for the other pieces in the puzzle. There were also the beliefs. This is a huge piece. For any physical challenge, any place that we feel stuck, really, there are some of these beliefs operating in the background of our mind, at the level of the unconscious. Just like that phrase, I need to be perfect, beliefs can be about, I can't do anything about my health. That can be a belief. A lot of beliefs I see are about limitations, about who we are, how the world works. I'm not good enough. That's probably the most common one that I run into. But through NLP and hypnosis, we know that these beliefs aren't really real. They just feel kind of real, right? And if we shift the mental block, we can shift the feeling, we can shift our reality. Who you are is bigger than any idea, any opinion, any label. And that takes us up to the next step, identity. How do we define ourselves? What are the labels that we've accepted or that we've taken on about who we are or what's possible for us? And can we change? I see clients change identity quite often. I used to be a smoker. I'm not smoking anymore. I'm a non-smoker. How flexible can you be with the awareness of who you are? What is the truth about who you are? And when we come back to that core self, then we can start to create new expressions of what's true for us. So beliefs and values were kind of together. I skipped over values. The values are about what is important to us. What do we put our value on? If we're not putting value on self-care, then at some point it might catch up with us. So we talked about beliefs, values, identity, and then the last one is system. So this is the system beyond you. In NLP, applying this to the body and health issues, we look at genetic history, ancestral history. Just the other day, I found an article talking about how our thoughts and emotions actually change gene expression. What? Yes, our mind-body system is more flexible than we have previously thought. And more every day, we're getting more research to the effect, the awareness of the integration of the mind-body system. So the 7 levels of healing, if we start to apply it to our own lives, whether it's minor challenges or whether it's more in-depth things, think of it as puzzle pieces. What are the puzzle pieces that are at work here? What are the habits that I notice in how I feel? What are the habits I notice in how I'm thinking? And then looking for these unconscious blocks that could be causing that interference.
Go quantum, dude!